Hey, welcome to Watch Complications. I'm Brian. Hit that subscribe button and the bell if you want updates. Follow me on Instagram at watch_complications and check out my site, watchcomplications.com, for all things watches. What I'm going to do in this video is wrap up the project I've been working on for fitting this series of Ronda 515 movements to a generic SKX case. Very popular case, very popular movements. The Ronda 515 has a variety of movements, from a 3-hand date watch to different 24-hour variants, and I made a spacer kit, really 2 spacer kits, that will help match those movements to those generic cases. And what I want to do here is show the 2 options. If you're interested in grabbing one of these, contact me, let me know. If you are interested in either this sort of a spacer kit or something different, different movements, different cases, I have a section of my site that's for ordering custom parts and working with me on solutions to help you get the custom watch look you're after. So in the video previous to this one, I did a watch build beginning to end in terms of overall custom build of a watch, and I hinted in that video at the beginning about other things coming, and I kind of give some insight into that in all my videos a little bit. I really want to get to more tools. People really seem to like when I do either explanations of what tools are, how to use them, or sort of overviews of essential tools to have around you if you're into tinkering, modding, or getting more deeper into making. So there's more of that stuff coming. I got an L&R Master cleaning machine, completely refurbished. This works like the Mastermatic. It oscillates. It's got the heater. I can't wait to show you more about this machine. I am going to get to the Brian and the Grill series and the Armin and give a good review of that, and I have good pictures of breaking that down through the repair. I don't think I'm going to do a full review of this, but you'll see this from time to time. This is my latest acquisition. This is the Christopher Ward C63 Sealander GMT with the white dial. This has quickly become sort of my all-around grab it and go daily sort of watch. I've had it for a couple weeks. It's such a versatile watch. If you really want a wonderful daily sort of a watch that has all the great things about Swiss watchmaking, great design, great dial symmetry. I love that the date's at 6. The combination of size, weight, bracelet, rubber, leather, this thing looks good on everything. So that's the Christopher Ward C63 Sealander. If you're into watches, you've probably seen stuff about this recently, but this is just a great watch. I'm really enjoying it. Maybe I'll show more on that at some point in the future. For right now, let's put some Ronda 515 movements in an SKX case. All right, so what I'm doing is showing the completion of this project and how the 2 basic spacer kits fit together. And if you want any of these sets, feel free to contact me. You can find my contact information or custom parts form on my website, watchcomplications.com. So here's a nice basic SKX case. I have a top hat crystal. You can see the chapter ring in there. And this one has the crown at 3. You can also get them with crown at 4. And I have 4 variations of the Ronda 515 movement. There are 3 basic sizes to them. And what I mean by that is the pin height for the hands. So this is a regular 515, 3-hand movement with a date. This one has the date at 6. Now the base height is the same across the entire 515 line. What I mean by that is if I take my calipers and measure this height, it's 3.03 millimeters across all of them. What differs when you look at these online is the pin heights for the hands. So the 515, the regular 3-hand movement with the date, you can get variations of these with dates in different locations, but these are the main ones. The overall height on the 515 and on the 515 dual time, so this is the 24D, you can see it has this rotating disc at center. Both of these are 4.4 millimeter tall. The 24H, which has a hand, that's what the H is for, to indicate that 24-hour time, has a height of 4.8 millimeter. The 24H.2, which also has a 24-hour hand, but this has higher pins on it for the hands. This one's 5.1 millimeter. Basic version and the 24D, 4.4 millimeter overall height, 4.8 overall millimeter height on the 24H, and 5.1 on the 24H.2. So when it comes to creating a spacer kit for using these movements in a readily available case like an SKX 007 case, there's a couple approaches, and I showed a little bit about this in my previous video for the 24H specifically, but I've kind of got it all figured out for the entire line. To be honest, my favorite movement of these to use is the dual time, and I've done a build with this before called a dual time. I just spelt it differently on purpose. And then I also like the 24H.2. You'll see why as we get into the two options. The basic solution for all of these is to have a spacer that sits between the chapter ring and the dial, and that raises the movement up to the correct height so that the stem is at the right location and isn't, going up or down at any angle, but that stem is a nice level height. So spacer ring, and then the dial and movement, and then a custom holder that will then secure it inside the case. So here's option one, works for all of these movements. I have a spacer, appropriate height. You can see over here I've tested a variety of heights. This goes all the way from 1 millimeter down by tenths, and I got to the one that really fits best. Of course, the diameter, inner and outer, is appropriately sized to sit nicely in the case with the chapter ring. So no struggle, fits down in there. Then I want to get a dial blank. This doesn't have any printing on it. It's got that date window at 3, and I'm using this on the dual time. So this will illustrate what this would look like across the entire line, but I'm going to use this dual time movement. Obviously this doesn't have a cutout for that second time zone, but if you were using this on the 3-hand or on the 24H, this would be the same idea. All right, so got the dial fit on there. You can see the date and the pins for the hands. Now I will set this down in here at right location. Height for the stem, you can kind of see it there, is at the right location, right? So that's the idea. Now what that means is on dial side, we have this spacer around the edge between the chapter ring and the dial. It can look really good. It can provide a point of contrast. So imagine here I could print this in black. So if I had a white base dial and this silver chapter ring, having a black spacer there might look really good. It blends in a little more if I do it in like a silver or a white. Again, it just depends on the color combination, look of contrast or blending in that you're going for, but it doesn't look out of place. That's the main thing. It looks natural. It's like it's made to be this way. That's the first part, is the spacer, getting the movement to the right height. And then we've got the holder for it, and I've marked this. This is for the regular 24H, and this also works across all the movements if they're using that dial side spacer. You can see I've got a cutout here. There's some notches here on top to help press against the case back. And so we've got a location here cut out for the stem. And this fits nicely around the movement. It actually almost snaps into place. You could put it on the movement before you put it down in the case if you wanted to. What you're looking for in one of these holders is that it's basically sitting right above the edge, right above the line. That's the way this one is made. It also fits nice and loose around the edge. You can feel just a slight amount of friction. It's against the edge, but it's not super tight where it's hard to pull out. But the main thing is you don't want this so tight that whenever you twist that case back to screw it down, that it wants to pull the holder with it, because then you'd be potentially impacting the stem, and we don't want that. So you want it to be just right in terms of the fit, not where it's pulling on it, but also where it's snug against the edges of the case back. Let me show you what this looks like around the edge. I'll put the spacer back in there in a second. You see that sits level against the back of the dial, and you can see there is the location for the stem cut out. And then whenever we put the case back against this, we'll have just the right amount of space for the stem to squeak through. It is just the right amount of space for that stem when this is screwed down all the way. It takes a while to tweak all the measurements and to get this drafted up correctly in CAD, but eventually you get there and works great. One other note about this that I showed in the last video, but I'll repeat here, there's this half circle cut out here on the side opposite the stem, and I've added a half circle cylinder here to help lock into place there. And that's just creating a more secure fit for the entire thing, so that even if you tried to turn it, it's a little bit resistant to turning it because of that sort of locking into place. Again, as a reminder, this works for all of the 515 movements. That dial side spacer that is the appropriate height, this holder, which here I'll just give you one little hint, it's 5 millimeter tall overall, not including the notches. And then I put the gasket in place. We can put the stem in here, and I just want to give you a visual of what these things look like once everything's in place. Now I'm going to put the case back on. I won't tighten it down all the way with the case tool. And you can feel it's a snug fit against the holder. We'll get to a reasonable little stopping point there and take a look at it. You can see that looks fairly nice. Everything's flush. It's not pressing too hard or too loose against that holder in the back. If I shake this around, you can always hold it up to your ear. I would always recommend that. I don't hear anything, neither the spacer or the holder rattling around inside the case. Everything's just a nice, good, strong fit. You can see that looks just fine, but it's one way to get a movement that's not meant to go in this case fitted for it. And so that's option one. This works across all the 515 movements, and if you're interested, let me know. You know, with these cases, getting that case back just even snug against there, hard to unscrew. Little rubber ball makes it real easy. I'll show this in maybe some future tool video. I got to do more videos on tools, specific tools. So watch for that coming. You're going to see more of that. When you're messing around with these 515 movements, one thing to keep in mind is that to remove the stem, you want this in the time setting position so you can remove the stem easily. Or else you'll mess things up and break it. So don't do that. I should also add that if you use this spacer approach, you don't have to use any special kind of hands for the watch. You can use regular hands meant for this movement with regular post lengths, and it's a non-issue. Okay, so option two is to use a movement side spacer and a little bit shorter of a holder. You can do this with any of the movements. However, if you were to put the 515, the 24D, or the 24H and use this movement side spacer we're going to take a look at, here's a couple variations of that. If we're going to use one of these movement side spacers, then we're going to have hands with longer posts. That's where the 24H.2 comes in, because it has pin height that is higher to accommodate this sort of thing. I already mentioned that the 515 24H has an overall height of 4.8 millimeter. Well, the 24H.2 has an overall height of 5.1, and that's all in the hand height that you see here, and that I showed in the photo a little bit earlier, and I'll show it again. All we're talking about is different. The base is the same. It's about 3 millimeters, just a hair over, but the hand heights are different, and that's so it can deal with a thicker dial, or in this case I'm putting in a watch case that has some constraints that I have to work around using spacers. It can accommodate that sort of work. So instead of using dial side spacer, I went through a series of tests like I do with all my 3D prints, and here's what we have. First, sort of created a template. Here's the dial, and first it's getting the dial feet locations for this, and you can see I've got these little notches cut on both sides, 180 degrees apart. So getting the dial feet cut into this thing, it stretches around, it's got the right height, so there's going to be a spacer between the back of the dial and the movement. Again, to get that stem height correct, we're just doing it on the back side instead of the front side. So that was the first step. Then, because you're raising the movement away from the dial, and I'm putting space between there, you're going to get a gap between the movement date and the date window. which could look a little odd, right? It looks like it's sitting down a little bit further, that date, because there's space between here. So I wanted to help alleviate that weirdness by putting a window with the same height, so it just gives a border around it, so it's not like, say, negative space, but it's got something there that frames that gap between the movement date and the cutout on the dial. And so we put that into place. Now let me show you, this works well, but it does have one potential issue, which actually doesn't affect it in any sort of extreme way. But this has a very shallow height to it. I mean, this is like 0.3, 0.4 millimeters tall. That's it. Okay, so we got that on there. And then we have a holder that's sized a little differently than the one for the general line if you're using a dial side spacer. This one's about a 0.5 millimeter taller because we're not dealing with as thick of a spacer in this circumstance. Of course, we're dealing with things like the hand heights and the stem height, so on and so forth, case back height. Same notion though, we've got the cutout for the stem, and we've got the half circle here going into that notch, and this snaps down into place much like the other one. Probably hear that. And there's the stem location. But because we've added that spacer, and this has this half cylinder notch here, you can see it's raised up that amount on one side. That's because of the spacer there in the cutout. So it sits a little bit higher. Couple solutions for that. You could just take this and trim off a little bit there on the bottom. Again, it's not that tall, and it would fit, flush, sit down. But actually, it's such a minute amount that, and I've tested this, you could put it in a case like this and it's just fine. So there's one side that sits up just a hair higher. Remember, there's notches. Those will get compressed a little bit if it needs to be. So not a big deal. I can make it like this and just leave it that way. Be fine. And I've actually sold them to customers like that, and it's fine. But I wanted to be as fancy about it as possible. So let me show you the evolution of this movement side spacer, and you can see what it looks like. Notice what I've done is I've just created a cutout and taken the structure of the spacer around this half circle. Okay, and again, looks good, looks the same. It's just got that accommodation for that space. And this is probably one of the best quality ones that I've seen printed off of my 3D printer, by the way, which is a Lulzbot Mini 2. I have a micro extruder, so I can print pretty fine prints. And if you were to get one of these, by the way, the best way to put this on the dial is put it around the date window, get it in that notch on one side, and then just pull it across the other, like so. All right, let's put the movement back on here, press that down, and now notice there is no white here, no spacer coming across that mark. Goes around it nicely. And now I can take the holder and it will fit down in there, snap in, and sit flush. All right, so it's all attached now. And again, notice the date sits a little bit lower, and you can see on the inside of that, just barely, you can see that there's a frame around it. Again, it would look a little bit more strange. Let me pop in a little closer, maybe that'll help. There you can see the frame. Okay, sitting in there. That makes it look a little bit more natural than just having black space around there. And it looks pretty good. You can see that the hand height is fine. Get the 24-hour location here at the bottom, and the hour, minute, seconds. All 4 layers there above the edge of the dial, so the regular hands can be used with regular post lengths. That's the important thing with this particular setup, is using regular hands for this. Looks good, everything flush, and then it's just fitting it down in the case. Again, we don't need dial side spacer. Everything's accounted for here on the movement side. So we just fit that down in the case, the stem in place, snaps in just fine. And now we've got this where there's no dial side spacer. That dial's sitting right against the chapter ring. So again, if that's the look you're going for, we've got now this 24-hour GMT quartz movement inside of this SKX case. And you can again see that sits right there around the edge. Put the gasket on here, screw down the case back, works the same way, and it's a nice snug fit all around. So those are the options for fitting this line of movements into this very generic case that is readily available. What I hope is that you find either information about the process, what it takes to work with these movements inside of these cases, and same process no matter what case you're using or movements you're using, is kind of just figuring out, well, what kind of holder do I need to design, what kind of spacer, if any, do I need to design, and see what works. Yeah, that's fitting Ronda 515 movements into SKX cases. If you are interested in doing a project like this, need me to work on the spacers, print them up for you, I sell these. You can contact me and we can go from there. Let's check out. As always, I hope you found this video helpful. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to keep up to date with what's going on here at Watch Complications, hit that subscribe button and the bell if you want updates. Follow me on Instagram at watch_complications and check out my site where you will find the form and information if you wanted to get one of these spacer kits or work on a different case movement combination with me. I'm Brian. I am out.